Copyright in these lectures is either owned by the ANU or a third party who has licensed the ANU to use it. Students may use the recording for personal study only. No lecture may be communicated online, copied or shared without the prior permission of the ANU.
Okay, let's get started. So first, I will tell you the quiz answer. I actually mean to do it that day right after quiz, tell you the answers. But because of this, the problem with some of the copies, so we sort of forgot that. So today I'll first tell you the answers. Now, I will not hand out the graded quiz because it's just one sheet, but there's 227 people, and the assistant haven't been able to enter the marks in the Excel sheet yet, and it's also going to take me way too much time to hand them out and collect. But if I only know there's only so few students show up, maybe I should have done that. Anyway, so let me give you the answers, and after the marks are entered, I can upload to the Wattle, so you can see the marks in the Wattle. And if you want to check your own sheet, maybe once you can finish marking, maybe in another week after you come back from the break, you can come to my office to see it, okay? Now, let me just also answer. So the first question, which following regarding GDP growth is incorrect? Okay, you find it incorrect, so which one is incorrect? So the first one, technology improvement can improve productivity, hence GDP, that's correct. Right? The development of financial markets can improve capital allocation, hence GDP, right? These are all. The population growth is major driver for GDP growth, that's also correct. Family-oriented culture is not good for GDP, that's not correct. That's actually the major, one of the major institutions we're talking about, the familism could actually support economic growth as well. Stock market could reflect the future GDP growth. That's also correct because that's the future GDP, right? That's our actually the later that mathematical practice is for this one. So the answer is D. Right? The family-oriented culture can also support economic growth or GDP growth. Now, the second question, an investment bank involves the following business. That's pretty simple, right? Underwriting, merger acquisition, and the trading. And in the trading, they consist of market making, trading themselves, or trading for the clients, which is their brokerage service, right? So the correct answer is all the above. Third question, let's go slow a little bit. Which of the following are not considered as good investor protection? Considered not good. Okay, one share, one vote, that's a good investor protection. Broke shares before shareholding meeting, that's not good protection, right? Remember, allowing the shareholders to trade even before the meeting, that gives them more option to choose either to vote or to just exit. Senior credit get paid first. This is a legal arrangement of senior credits versus junior credits. Remove manager in reorganization process, that's also correct, right? When the firm goes in bankruptcy, don't let the management still control the assets. Right. And so all the above is good, so this one is not correct because there is this B is incorrect. The fourth question, which of the following is not, again, not correct about having a common international currency separated from domestic currency? Right. Countries with trade deficit will become poor because he lose the common currency. Countries with trade deficit will depreciate currency. That's also correct because now they have they become much poorer their own currency. The exchange rate relative to the international currency will become depreciated. Countries with trade surplus will depreciate. That's wrong, right? Will appreciate. Countries with trade surplus will become rich. Sorry, this is a typo. Should be rich. This is sorry. This is letter. Okay. Then now the above. So this is pretty simple, because B and C are so similar, right? You can just find between these one B or C, one of them has to be wrong, right? And the country with trade surplus will appreciate, become more rich countries. Any questions on the multiple choice? Okay, that's all good. Okay, then let's look at the calculation question. Now, the calculation question is in the slides. So in the class, I didn't go step by step, but I was assuming the calculation should be, this is the basic, right? So once I give it, usually I shouldn't even give you the formula. This should be the formula you guys know. And then now, first, what is the price now? So the price now is P0, now is current point, right? Will be the expected cash flow 1 year from today. Remember, cash flow 1 year ahead, divide by required return minus the growth rate, right? So you just plug the number in, basic PT equals to 96 multiple 1 plus 4%, right? Divide by 10% minus 4%. So then you will get the answer which is 1664, or if you write 167 as the slides do, it's also fine because the slides actually does 96 multiple of 1 become 100, so it was for simplicity. Okay, and so that's a very direct, plug the number on this formula. What is the expected return on the equity? This is also almost giving for free, right? The expected return on the equity should be the required return of the equity because that's how you come upon the price, right? So it is just 10%. You even don't need a calculation. Okay? Now, the second step is, so this is the one, the simple, easiest one to keep your brain clear of the time point is to draw a line. If you draw a line, right now its current is 0. If expected cash flow growth by the end of the second year change to 6%, right? So then basically you need to draw the line to time point 0 is now. Then end of first year is time point 1, right? And the end of second year, time point of 2, right? And at second time point 2, what is the cash flow at time point 2? Which will be now 96 multiple 1 plus 4%, and another year 1 plus 4%, right? And then at the time point 2, your expected GDP or free cash flow growth is going to change to 6%. That means at time point 2, your expected future cash flow at time 3 will be what is now multiple 1 plus 6, right? So most common mistake is you guys did the current cash flow of time point 2 rather than the future cash flow. Because remember the formula, if you want a price of P2, you need expected cash flow of E cash flow 3, right? And the E cash flow 3 is a current one, multiple 1 plus 4%, multiple another 1 4%, which become cash flow 2, then multiple 1 plus 6%. That is the most common mistake. Okay. Anyway, okay, so this is first, then that's the first question, right? So what is the price at time 2? Now the second question is what is the excess return for the stock for the second year? Now this has 2 steps, right? If you want to know the excess return, you want to know what was the actual return, then you minus the expected return, right? That is your excess return. Now, so to get the actual return of year 2, you guys, this must be the first finance course, corporate finance course. How do you calculate a stock's return for a certain holding period? You're going to have capital gain plus dividend payout, right? And divide by the initial price. Now, to get the capital gain, the first I have already calculate what is the price at the end of second year. So you want the second year's return. You want to know the price at the beginning of the second year, right? So that means you will apply this formula again, but at the beginning of second year or at the end of first year, right? So you get a P1, expected cash flow of 2, divided by required return minus growth rate. Right. So then you will get P2, or you will get P1, a price. Now once you get a P1 price, so the total return will be the capital gain, which is P2 minus P1, plus the cash flow or the dividend payout of that year, right? You already calculated in the first step. Then divided by the initial price, P1. That gets you the total return, which should be 64.9%. And then you minus the excess return 10%, which give you 54.9%, which is the excess return. Right? And the reason that you have such high excess return in year 2, in this year, is because the growth rate, expectation of the growth rate changes, right? And you have a very large price depreciation. This is typically an event that happens if the economy has been in recession slow for a time, then the booming come, right? You see the market jumps up. Okay, so now the second, in this part, most of you guys lose points. Either because of when you calculate P2 using expect cash flow 2 rather than 3, or or either forgot the dividend payment, or actually mainly that, or the P1 was using the P0 rather than P1. That's another case. There are several students get them right. The several students gets right, and then among them there's one student is very unfortunate. She made a mistake of when you calculate P2, the growth rate should be 6% now, right? And he was still using 4%. In that case, I take off just 0.5 points off. So basically, in this question 6, there are many steps. As long as you get any one step correct, you'll get 1 point. Or if you get the formulas or the idea, for example, it's a capital gain and formula there, I will give you 1 point. If you need to know to add in the dividend, I will also give you a point. Okay? Now, if you get the formula there correct, but the number plug wrong because the early stage was wrong, you'll still get a point as well. So anyway, so this 4 points is I break down as much as possible to give you partial points on this. Any questions? Any questions on this quiz? Okay, if you want to check the grades, if you want to check the marks, I wait for some time to be sure upon the Vato. If you want to check your own answer after the break, come to my office. Okay, so just give the assistant enough time to enter into your sheets. That's the reason problem with big class. It takes long for them to do things. Okay, so that's quiz. Now, next thing is, so Professor Yamada told me somehow the YouTube doesn't work on this computer, right? Last week, he said he couldn't watch the video. This is interesting because I tried on my computer. He also tried on his computer before the class, and so in that case, the video is about just 15 minutes long. I would suggest you to try it on your own computer. Did any of you try? Just copy the link into your YouTube. No answer is do you guys know what I'm talking about? Or okay. Okay, it's just for your understanding. So it's everything that needed to talk to, it was in the slides and talked already. So just for yourself, if you want interest to watch the video, you can copy paste in your own slide, in your own computer. It's interesting why they don't. Should we try one more time? This is really funny.
One of the risks that every investor confronts is whether the dollars he converts into a foreign currency, be it the Mexican peso or the Russian ruble, will hold their value. The worth of a country's currency, its money, is crucial to every global transaction and to every country's prosperity. So the global financial system, through its treasury secretaries, finance ministers, and central bankers, constantly argues about the value of currencies.
The instability of currencies, fluctuating dramatically, whether it's yen, dollar, or dollar Deutschmark, or the ringgit, or the baht, or the ruble, makes what I call the poker game in the sky. And almost nobody sees it clearly, and very few people even know that it's going on. And it's played among governments, and almost all of it is done in private.
The combat of currencies, their continually changing value, is one of the reasons global speculators like George Soros, or Tiger Management, or so-called hedge funds, can make billions of dollars with one smart bet.
He's talking about changing rates, guys. He said he's prepared to change rates.
The George Soroses and the hedge funds and big banks make a regular, profitable practice of looking at that poker game and saying, I think they've got it wrong. They can't keep that relationship that's developed between the baht and the dollar, or between the yen and the Deutschmark, or whatever. So I'm going to play off that imbalance that they're stuck with and wait for them to collapse, or wait for them to quit the game and let the currency fall, or whichever.
The foreign exchange rates are up in this little corner with the dollar against the yen.
Robert Johnson is a former top portfolio manager for Soros Fund Management, a private fund whose minimum required ante is $250,000.
You're looking at electronic screens. When I watch my children, they're playing Nintendo or Sega or Pokemon or whatever the current game is, it's analogous. There's an electronic screen. At some level, the video game is like a virtual reality. You're playing with this game and with your imagination. In essence, you're not out in the field experiencing the changes in employment and agricultural harvests and things like that. You're looking at a distillation of all the indicators about that process over an electronic screen. You're removed from the actual economy while trying to interpret the economy through electronic means.
I still think we buy it somewhere in between.
In today's hot-wired financial markets, modern technology means traders can move money anywhere in the world at lightning speed.
Hey, D? Yeah.
More than $1.5 trillion every day.
Hey, 11. I'm no better than that. Like I said, it's not million. Okay.
You spend almost all your time, even some of your dreaming time, thinking of things that could hurt you and how you would react. How am I going to react if this happens? Or, alternatively, what can I imagine that could happen that could hurt me that I haven't thought of yet? When I sit at the pool on Saturdays with my kids, sometimes they think I'm not there because in my mind, I'm off playing these scenarios through in my mind. And it's all about trying to stay a couple steps ahead and anticipate what's coming up.
A speculator makes money by betting on how a currency will move. If his bet is that it will fall, that play is called shorting.
3 million?
When you put on a play is when you feel like you know something that the world doesn't.
Then you're right, then you make a lot of money.
Yeah,
That's the theory.
yeah, but it's interesting. It isn't about truth, because you can be wrong. As long as the world changes their opinion to feel that what you perceive is true, even if you're all wrong, you still make money. So it's about the migration of their perceptions more than it is about the underlying truth.
Countries commit to an exchange rate in order to guarantee returns on investments in the domestic currency to foreign investors or to domestic investors. That guarantee is only worth how much money you have in the bank. And it's only worth the confidence, the trust you can instill in investors and speculators that you will have enough wherewithal to sustain your currency. If they decide you can't, you've had it, because they will end up getting you.
And the speculators call the bluff of the finance minister who's saying this is a fixed exchange rate for all time. It's the pressure that the speculators put on, which says the markets don't think you can sustain it. Show us. Inflict pain upon the economy. Raise interest rates. Defend the currency that you say is so vital. That can go on so far, but a central bank might have 20, 50, 80 billion dollars in a market that's daily volume is $600-700 billion, and if everybody becomes focused on the same thing, $50 billion can disappear in an afternoon.
The inside moves of the global poker game are often put in play by decisions made in Washington. In April 1995, the U.S. Treasury would orchestrate an agreement, virtually unnoticed at the time, that would help ignite the Asian financial crisis. The finance ministers from the world's 7 richest countries, the global game's high rollers, would try to restart the long-ailing Japanese economy by ratifying a U.S. proposal to try to increase the value of the dollar against the yen.
Those countries in Asia, for instance, or some in Latin America, that decided, well, we can't play in that big poker game in the sky, so we'll just attach our currency to the dollar. And whether it goes up or down in relative value to others, we will promise investors that we're going to stick with the dollar. And that's basically a guarantee to U.S. investors. If you send your capital to our country, you won't be burned by a sudden change in currencies.
The Asian tigers, caught up in their own giddy growth, paid little attention at first to the move by the G7 high rollers.
The problem is that as the dollar appreciates, those countries without currency have to ride with it too.
the dollar began to rise. As it did, the Asian currencies pegged to the dollar rose in value too. And that meant the country's exports became more expensive in the global market. Sales began to fall, and deficits began to grow.
In early 1997, investors like George Soros and the hedge funds, who have a sharp eye for instabilities building in the system, focus on Thailand and begin betting that Thailand is going to have to devalue its currency because it's borrowing too much money. And so they start betting that there's going to be a currency devaluation at least, if not collapse. And of course, the fact that the big money starts betting against the currency often has the effect of fulfilling the prediction.
There's a very rational process going on in the financial markets. It goes kind of like this. I know I'm not that smart, but I know Soros is. So I'll watch what he's doing, and I'll go along for the ride.
Soros is shrewd and powerful, but he can't move the system by himself. His power is amplified because all of these major banks, the ones in Wall Street, the ones in London, Frankfurt, even in Tokyo, are putting chips down on his bet.
As the betting escalated, the Thai currency, the baht, literally came under attack. And the Thai government was forced to buy more and more baht with the dollars it keeps in reserve, essentially paying off the speculators who wanted to cash out.
What can we buy, Mike? It's my question.
Each and every one of those transactions is pulling money out of Thailand and bringing it back to the United States, putting downward pressure on the Thai baht.
And the Thai government has to then spend more of its reserves to prop the currency up, and eventually it reaches a point of exhaustion, and then you get a crisis of collapse. And that was the trigger for all of the events that followed. But it wasn't Thailand's fault, it was simply happened to be in the crosshairs first.
As the assault on the baht intensified, the government turned to the International Monetary Fund for help.
What was the name of the game for good doctoring at that point? It was to calm the nerves and prevent panic.
Jeffrey Sachs is a Harvard economist who has become a leading critic of the policies pushed by the U.S. Treasury and the IMF. He calls the IMF the typhoid Mary of emerging markets.
The IMF came in, as is their wont, and I think the U.S. rhetorically added to this. And the IMF took one look around Thailand and said, this place is much worse than anybody thinks. We're going to clean it up. 58 finance companies, we want you to close right now. All of a sudden, people started to look around and said, I don't know what's going to happen in Thailand in 1998, but I know in the second half of 1997, there's not enough to pay us all off, and I want to be the first one out.
What happens when a currency like Thailand's cracks is that everybody who didn't see it coming suddenly turns white with fear and runs for the door. I mean that almost literally. Their first impulse is to get out. Because they're all trying to do that at once, that drives the currency or the stock market or whatever down even further, more dramatically, and very quickly, in matters of hours or days.
On July 2nd, 1997, the government in Bangkok lost its battle against the speculators and ran out of cash. Within weeks, currencies tumbled, capital fled, and governments began to tremble throughout the region. First Malaysia, then on to Indonesia, and by the end of the year, South Korea. As in every financial panic since the 17th century, one investor said, greed had turned to fear.
The one problem that I said would not happen would be a generalized financial crash. Of course, that was dead wrong, but I think I may have reflected what most of us were thinking, and that is, yeah, there could be a lot of problems, but they would be confined to individual countries, or they would be problems of corruption, or maybe a revolution somewhere, but nothing like what happened when that problem in Thailand started to spread. That took everybody by surprise.
I think this is a time for confidence in the future of Asia and confidence in the future of our relationship with them. We have a few little glitches in the road here. We're working through them. And
the president tried to reassure the markets himself. But faced with a raging panic they had not foreseen and a jittery U.S. stock market, he and Treasury Secretary Rubin would dispatch the International Monetary Fund to lend the money to prop up the rapidly falling currencies. To secure the emergency IMF credit, the Asian governments had to agree to the economic remedies favored by Washington and Wall Street, including cutting budgets and dramatically raising interest rates paid to foreign investors.
They certainly came in there and demanded a level of immediate austerity, which threw these countries into a tailspin. And I believe personally, this is, a lot of people disagree with me, that they asked these countries to do too much at one time. It wasn't just to get their monetary policy and their trade policy in order, or their fiscal policy in order, but they immediately started to ask for wholesale restructuring of the economies themselves. And while all of that had to be done, if you do it all at once, the social cost, the cost in terms of unemployment and the sheer human misery that is created, I think was too much.
Sky-high interest rates might slow down the outflow of dollars, but they also crush domestic economies and turn once secure jobs into rubble. The jobless rate in Thailand would increase by 50%, and much of its budding middle class was thrown back into poverty. In South Korea, a country where being out of work is considered a stigma, nearly 10,000 people a day were losing their jobs. Tens of thousands took to the street in protest. In Indonesia, the free fall of the rupiah set off waves of panic buying. When the government signed a final pact with the IMF, riots erupted. Within a year, 80 million Indonesians were once again poor.
The voices of the markets, like the IMF, have become the villains of the markets. And, if you go to Korea right now, and you talk to them about the bad year they've just gone through, they refer to it as the IMF time.
With its economy in a virtual freefall, Thailand received an emergency rescue loan from the International Monetary Fund. When that didn't work, the Thai government asked Washington for even more help. No one imagined that an economy as small as Thailand's could spark a global crisis.
Thailand is a very small economy. It doesn't have a lot of links, and it's not exactly in your backyard. In any event, the U.S. chose not to intervene in Thailand, thinking it was not going to spill over. Why would it? The contagion effects were not apparent to anybody, not just the administration.
I think they misjudged the situation. And probably because it was seen too much as a financial issue rather than an overall strategic issue.
Global markets worried that other Asian countries might have similar hidden flaws. Like a classic run on the bank, money began to pull out of the entire region. They called it contagion.
And at each stage, the crisis turned out to have a virulence that became known as contagion, much greater than it had been anticipated. And what that really reflected was indeed globalization, was the way these economies had become locked together, and investors looked at emerging markets. They said there's a problem in Thailand, well then there's a problem in these other countries. And so each step of the crisis created these shock waves that carried on into the next.
Contagion spread to Thailand's neighbors. Malaysia's economy had seemed stable. Suddenly, it too was facing relentless pressure from global markets.
We have the currency going down and down and down, and we have the stock market doing the same. And we felt totally helpless. We feel that there is no way we can recover. So, I mean, the feeling is really very bad, very frightening.
Contagion next hit Indonesia, the most populous country in the region. Its government collapsed. Its cities descended into chaos.
The fund managers didn't know the difference between Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore. They just said, I want out. Property prices collapsed, companies collapsed. And in the case of Indonesia, the social fabric collapsed. Churches have been burned, mosques have been attacked. They have killed each other. And it's all the fallout of an economic collapse.
This was a new kind of financial crisis, unlike anything the International Monetary Fund had ever encountered. The IMF organized huge loans for Indonesia and other Asian nations, on the condition they cut government spending, raise interest rates, and eliminate corruption.
You are the doctor going in to deal with a very sick patient. The public blames the doctor for the fact that the patient is sick, but the patient was sick to begin with. But these things are societally wrenching, and there are huge vested interests. And you wouldn't get into these crises if the vested interests weren't that important. That, I think, is one of the reasons why it takes political change to deal with a crisis as big as this.
To some of the region's entrenched leaders, the IMF's conditions smacked of a new kind of colonialism.
Presently, we see a well-planned effort to undermine the economies of all the ASEAN countries by destabilizing their currencies.
In the old days, you need to conquer a country with military force, and then you can control that country. Today, it is not necessary at all. You can destabilize a country, make it poor, and then make it request for help. And for the help that is given, you gain control over the policies of a country. And when you gain control over the policies of a country, effectively, you have colonized that country.
The market forces were simply too powerful for the IMF or any government to contain. In late 1997, contagion reached Korea, one of the most successful economies in the world.
It was unbelievable that the crisis has spread as quickly as to Indonesia and Korea within a matter of 6 months or 7 months. But the world was much more globalized than we thought it was at that time.
In the last week of December of 1997, the 11th largest economy in the world, which is Korea, had, roughly speaking, $4 billion of reserves left and was using reserves at the rate of $1 billion a day. Well, it didn't take a great deal of quantitative insight to see that that was not a long-term viable situation.
Korea had been misleading the world, claiming it had enough money to withstand the crisis. The IMF's Stanley Fischer arrived in Seoul to inspect the central bank's accounts.
I visited Korea a couple of days before they turned to the IMF for help, and there was a state of panic. And it was at that point that I went to the central bank and was shown how much money was left in the Korean central bank. It was essentially all gone.
Korea was about to default on its loans from Japanese and Western banks. Pressured by their governments, The banks agreed to share some of the pain. They rolled over their loans. Korea was then given the largest bailout in history.
If they had done that in Thailand, I think that they would have not only avoided some economic problems, but I think that the sense in Southeast Asia that the Americans were really on the side of putting things right would have been stronger.
Then a very, very strange thing happened. From about the 1st of February 1998 until August, there was a period in which financial markets essentially decided that risk didn't exist anywhere.
Markets thought contagion had been contained in Asia. Investment flowed elsewhere. Some came to Russia, where the Moscow stock market was the best performing in the world. But economic reforms had stalled, and Russia was heavily in debt. Even so, investors were convinced they'd found an emerging market that couldn't fail.
Investors had decided Russia is an ex-superpower. It has lots of missiles and lots of atomic warheads for them. Certainly you could not have a financial accident in Russia because the rest of the world, the rich countries, would bail Russia out. Well, it turned out that that was wrong.
Russia defaulted on its debt. Its currency plummeted. Global investors were stunned.
All these people who in the previous 7 months had decided there was no risk anywhere literally panicked and decided there's got to be massive risk everywhere. Behind each fence and barnyard wall, there must be a risk that we hadn't thought of. Kind of like the redcoats retreating from Lexington.
Everywhere, markets were freezing up. The economic crisis seemed to have taken on a life of its own.
I thought at the time that I had a pretty good sense of what was going on. But what I didn't know, and nobody could possibly have known, was not what was going on at the moment that you were looking at, but what was going to happen at the next moment.
Well, when you get in a room with both Alan Greenspan and Robert Rubin, and they say they're scared to death, and they've never seen anything like this, and they're worried about whether or not we can get through it, I get worried, because they know a heck of a lot more about it than I do. You had the contagion sweeping across all the developing countries. As Rubin said, we've never seen that before. I mean, maybe in the Depression they saw that over a period of time, but nothing that happened that quickly.
Now the crisis had reached America. A little-known but powerful private investment fund was on the brink of bankruptcy. Long-Term Capital Management, or LTCM, directly controlled $100 billion of global assets and indirectly more than $1 trillion.
The 90s saw a huge buildup in concentrations that we had never seen on a global scale. Maybe we had way back in history, maybe the Romans had financial institutions that were disproportionately large to the overall activity of the world that they operated in, but LTCM was a specific type of hedge fund. They were involved, whether it was the Singapore Exchange, the Tokyo Stock Exchange, the London Stock Exchange, the New York, there was no market that they weren't maybe the largest player or close to the largest player.
By September 1998, LTCM's losses were spiraling out of control. Contagion had arrived on Wall Street. Incredibly, the failure of this single investment fund threatened the entire global economy.
If LTCM went down, it would be just the gears, the machine just stopping, the economy not working. And of course, it's not just what's on the balance sheet of banks and so forth, but that would translate into people not working, businesses not operating, small businesses not being able to get the capital they need, and this a global economy that almost inconceivable to see with the picture, but sort of just not working, and people just not working.
The New York Federal Reserve summoned representatives of major U.S. and European banks to an urgent meeting. John Corzine, then at Goldman Sachs, was among them.
The real problem with long-term capital was nobody really understood all the downsides. All one knew was it was going to be extraordinarily dangerous to enter into that. And everybody, I think, understood the Fed's concern that that had real implications to the real economy.
Since LTCM was a private fund, the government could not impose a solution. The fate of the global economy was in the hands of these bankers.
The head of a securities firm or a bank is not paid to be a patriot. He or she is paid to serve the best interests of the shareholders. So the most that one can do in a position like mine is to say the public interest may well be served by long-term capital management not failing. But there is no public sector money to solve the problem. The taxpayer is not going to do this. You folks have to decide whether it's in your interest to do it.
The banks agreed to put up their own money to rescue LTCM. Wall Street had averted disaster, but the global crisis had one final chapter to go. What had started in Asia now reached Brazil, the 8th largest economy in the world.
Okay, I think that's enough.
Jobs and richer lives for hundreds of millions of people worldwide. That was the promise.
Okay, so the other one, that's because I think we are going to run out of time if we do this. This is more like slides talking, so you guys can later on. Okay, so any questions on this slide, on last week's lectures? Any questions? Any slides that you think you want me to re-explain? Yes, no? Okay, so we're all good. In that case, let's just continue with week 6's class, which is today's. Okay. Just like give me a second to estimate how we. Okay. Put the midterm. Okay, so we're going to talk about first the euro crisis, right? And euro, is this working? So euro is a currency very unique. It's for the European Unions, and it looks like it's a common international currency, but the problem with it is also the domestic currency for all those member countries, right? So you end up in the situation, many countries has their domestic currency same as the international currency, right? And so then in this class, what I'm going to talk is how it is designed, which is simple, and why in this setting the euro is going to doom to fail, which you have been seeing since the past 10 years. Constantly those European countries, some country will go into crisis and they call euro crisis, right? And how it could be resolved the problem. We talk about again, like IMF or World Bank, the countries or in the EU, how they want to solve the problem. But in the end, what could be the correct solution we have actually talked in this week 4, right? Now, so what I was going to say, probably when the investor needs the money, because they're very concerned about the asset. So let me just, so Euro crisis is a European sovereign debt crisis. Basically, it's some country in the Eurozone cannot pay their government debt. Right, so the first one happens with Greek, which is almost 10 years ago now, like this. Yeah, almost 10 years ago now. And then then a lot of other countries follows, and then their sovereign debt has always been a problem since then. Right? Now, what does sovereign debt crisis mean? We know many countries borrowing, right? So we talk about in the US a lot of borrowing, but even in some of the countries, they don't have needs to borrow. For example, Singapore, they have surplus, but they still have government treasury bond. The reason is to develop interest rate market, etc. Now, the sovereign debt is a crisis, is a situation the government is in deep debt, and they cannot refinance without a third-party guarantee. Basically, no other country are willing or investor willing to lend to that country anymore, or that government, right? Or they have to refinance with very high interest rate, right? During the Euro crisis, like the sovereign debt bond to the Greek has go as high as 15%, while usually countries pays 1% to 2% on their treasury bond. Right, so that's the situation. And so there was, if you're searching online or people talking about this, a lot of studies they call the official causes of the problem. They talk about the global, they blame on globalization. They blame on this country borrowing too much. They blame on the previous global crisis. They blame on real estate bubble, etc., global recession, all those things. And particularly they blame saying the government have been spending too much. Right? Now, so those are all kinds of reasons that are superficial. So what in this course I want to show you is all those so-called reasons is just a trigger or a symptom. If we understand the economy, how the economy works or the monetary policy works, then you're looking at the euro design, you will see this is a currency is going to doom to have those problems. It's going to doom to have all this kind of problem coming up. Now why? So first the euro, right? So euro is the official currency of the Eurozone. So the Eurozone, or European Union, has 27 countries, but 17 out of them use euro, right? And so within these 17 countries, so now you have a basic, I didn't open, how do I do this? Is it this? Yeah. So using those countries, the 17 countries. Now think about what is the arrangement for those 17 countries. Now, these 17 countries have different economic conditions, right? Their productivity might be different. But these 17 countries has the same monetary system, right? They're using the one same currency. So that means they're going to have the one same interest. They're going to have one same central bank, which is European Central Bank, right? Now, then they have different government physical account, right? So the government has tax income, the government has spending, right? And then they have needed to borrow in the sovereign debt. So when you have these three situations all together, that means the country's economic condition different, the government policy, government physical policy are independent, but they have the same monetary policy. When you have all this together, then I will show you the system is going to have challenging, or eventually it will have to fail unless you fix any three of these things together, right? If you fix the middle one, so each has their own monetary policy, which is like all the other countries, right? Or you have to combine, they're talking about the economic condition to be the same, which is almost impossible for 17 countries to have the same economic strength, right? Now the other one, you probably have heard a lot in recent years, they're talking about European political unification, right? That means they're going to combine all the governments together. But this will solve the problem, but it's going to involve a lot of political issues, right? So right now, the system's still there, and then every once in a while, every other years or every years, some of the country is going to run into their sovereign debt crisis. Okay, now why? So I'm going to show you why. And before I show you, it's just I'm going to explain to you. Once you understand it, it's pretty simple, and you actually already learned all the knowledge. It's really economics, macroeconomics 101, or plus international economics 101. Okay, so that's something here. What you want is thinking. A lot of knowledge you guys actually, all the basic course after you taken, you have all the basic knowledge. Right now, it's from this onwards, it's always, not just this course, many other courses, it's only an application and you need to think it through. Now, so I'm going to start with this macroeconomics 101. Many of you taking macroeconomics, right? How many of you taking macroeconomics? Some. Okay, this is not good. So you need this is very basic economics. Okay, so in the macroeconomics, they will learn about the government intervention, right? When the economy is in the recession or in the booming, what are the intervention methods the government can do to stabilize the economy, right? And the tool are first interest rate. Right, so if the economy is in recession, what you tend to see? The government is increase the interest rate or lower the interest rate? Lower the interest rate, right? So make the fund cheaper, encourage investment, right, to bring the economy out of recession. And otherwise, if the economy is too hard into booming to avoid a bubble, what they do? They increase the interest rate, right, to make the fund more expensive. So that's one tool. Now, the second tool is exchange rate, right? The exchange rate is going to affect this country's trade or investment with other countries, right? For example, if the country is thinking they are too much in the international deficits and they would like to increase their exports, what would the government do? Depreciate their currency, right? So depreciate their own currency, then the price of their product become cheaper on the international market. That improve their competitiveness, right? Then that will increase more the sales of the exports. And this is a policy China has been doing for many years, and this is a major attack of other countries thinking that China are controlling currency, it's not fair trade. Right? So over the past probably 30 years, 20, 30 years, you have been seeing these debates. Now, on the other hand, you can increase if you increase what the other country wants China to do is to appreciate the RMB, then the products from China become more expensive, right? Then it's less competitive. So this, go ahead. It depends on, I know what you're saying, I just want to save time for our class. It depends on the economic condition, right? Remember we're talking about how the currency should be determined. You can't, yeah, okay, that's, I understand your point. Let me answer your question. And the way I answer your question is I'm not going to tell you yes or no, but rather I'll tell you how you should think about it, right? Remember, say, if let the market determines the exchange rate, and we have already talked about it, the factors. What are the factors, right? The economic strength, the productivity, right? The balance surplus or deficits, of your current account, or the demand supply, what you're talking about is the capital account, right? Those are the factors. Now, if it's in a market determined exchange rate, you will see the exchange rate fluctuates naturally when these economic indicator changes, right? And now, of course, you see China is a managed floating. So that means the exchange rate is not going to fully reflect those economic factors. Now, whether this is over-appreciate or over-depreciate, it's going to depend on those economic factors, right? So, of course, if China let the currency open now, you will see a big, you guys probably can see what's going to happen, right? But would that fully reflect the economic condition or reflects a panic of political related stuff, right? Or a temporary thing? As we have shown the video, there could be a self-fulfilling mechanism, right? When people don't have the trust in the currency, even if your economy is healthy, but like the Thailand, they are going to flow out, and this collective flowing out will cause the collapse of the currency, right? And then the RMB may be in the situation will depreciate even more rather than appreciate as what the criticism wants to see, right? Okay, so now this is what I said. Now, if you don't fully understand what I just said, look into the recent trade war, right? So Trump wants China to increase the tax or tariff of the Chinese exports, make the products more expensive, right? And what they wanted to see is the results of less trade deficits. RMB is going to, what they want, appreciate, right? But what you see recent annual view falling exchange market these days, because of this instability, people putting the whole global economy now put more trust in US dollars, right? So instead of US dollars see itself depreciate, other currency goes up. Nowadays, US dollar is appreciating, right? The result is hurting US exports. Now you see the dynamics, right? So there is a whole dynamics going on. So what you want to think about is to looking starting from what affects exchange rate. Okay? It's not just a simple of fair or unfair, because this is more like a political argument on these things. So let's come back on this foreign exchange rate. Now, clearly, so the government has exchange rate is a way that the government can use to influence the exchange, influence their monetary policy, or therefore influence the economy, right? And the reason, US dollar have to switch to this dynamic is because it's free floating. This can work, using exchange rate can work only when the government has the power to influence. They are not restrict themselves to a free floating, right? And last class we're looking at, there's pegging, there's managed floating, right? This is all different to do it. Now the third tool, the government can influence or can intervene the economy, is fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is basically government spending, right? The government expenditure spending. So now, if the economy is in recession, and the government want to use the last tool, fiscal policy, to influence the economy, to try to bring out of recession, what is the government to increase the spending or expenditure, or decrease the spending? Increase, right? So when the government increase their spending, for example, they increase spending by building new roads, right? So the money flow into the project hires employee, the employee get paid, the workers get paid, the workers now have higher demand purchasing goods on the market, so the economy starts running again, right? So this increased spending will bring the economy out of recession. I mean, will, intended to, right? But so if the economy is too much in booming, the government want to shrink the government projects, right? So that to avoid a bubble. Now, if you're thinking about a crisis situation, and not we are China, thinking about, we can apply both to China and the US. We think about in US, what was the common thing? The most or biggest projects they did is after the 1929 recession, they built a lot of reservoir around the country. So if you go to US, you will see many reservoirs. Basically, they just hiring labor to dig lakes, right? This is a very simple way of spending. It's very direct. Now, in China, you see a lot of investment these days. Or that's also a big criticism of China's economy, is too much bring about by the government spending. Build roads, build railways, one belt, one road. This is all the criticism, right? Now in Australia, again, there was a lot of infrastructure building. Now again, this could be good, or this could be just money, but it's just, it could be a way of government to influence the economy. It could be the economy do need those infrastructure to be built, right? But the point I want to show here is fiscal policy is one way for the government to influence the economy. So now your question. Yes, they are short-term. All these are short-term. All these three tools are short-term. It's just for the government to intervention. It's not an economic strategy. It's intervention tools. Okay. Economy is supposed to run like the market to run by itself. The government intervention comes in when the market fails. Okay, now clear? So these are all short, or you are very correct, they are the short-term intervention rule, okay? And remember the keywords, it's just the intervention rule. Okay, now, so this is what we understand. These are the three tools the government can intervention when the economy run into trouble and the market are unable to fix it, right? So then, now, and then that's looking at why I'm putting this one. Now, so the economic strengths of those European countries are different. And for example, we use Germany versus Spain to show it, right? This is current account balance as share of GDP. So Germany is in surplus, while Spain is in deficit. This is current account. That means that's the international trade. What this says is Germany's products are much more competitive, right? They sell more, while the Spain are buying more. So Spain is not as productive or competitive. This could be mainly because they are using the same currency. This is mainly coming from their technology advance or the labor strength, etc. Right? So just the German. And so in this situation, Spain right, so the Spain is not as productive. The products are not competitive enough on the market if you think just compare to Germany and make it simple, right? And what would German would like to do? Spain like to do, right? So their imports are way higher than exports for the Spain. And what happens to the industry in Spain? They will shrink, right? Because they're not productive, they're not competitive enough. People will buy German products rather than Spain products. So the industry in Spain will shrink, right? And then the unemployment in Spain is going to increase, right? And once the unemployment increase, what happens to the tax, right? The tax will decrease. That means government income is going to decrease, right? And then when all this happens, it's going to running in a cycle, a bad cycle for the, right? So now this is the time that the economy is, if you like, the market mechanism runs. Now, because this country is uncompetitive, it's on the shrinking cycle, right? This is the time the government needs to intervene. Now, what kind of intervene? We talk about interest rate, right? I'm just going to do it. So if we use interest rate in this situation, what should Spain do? Spain should lower its interest rate, right? But can Spain lower its interest rate by itself? For all the other countries, like China, Australia, US, no problem, because their government has this, their central bank controls their own monetary policy. But Spain is a euro country, right? Their currency is euro, which is shared by other 16 countries. And the interest rate policy is in the European Central Bank, right? Spain don't have an independent saying on that interest rate. Because at the same time, Germany is running booming. Germany would like a high interest rate, right? While Spain is in recession, would like a low interest rate. And then neither of them can have a single say because the European Central Bank has controlled the policy, right? So basically, because of this monetary unification, the interest rate as a tool is no longer available to Spain, right? So they can't use this one. If they could have used the interest rate, then they would break the cycle by avoid industry shrinking. They could lower the capital cost, right, to encourage investment, so avoid the industry shrinking. But they couldn't do it now. Now, what's the next tool? Foreign exchange rate. Does Spain have a foreign exchange rate tool here, or any of the euro? They don't, because they are all using euro, the same currency, right? So there's no foreign exchange rate they can influence either. So now, what is left here? Only the fiscal policy, right? The government fiscal policy is left for them. Now, in this situation, let's say Spain, what would the Spain government prefer to have? What type of fiscal policies they would prefer? They want to increase spending, right? Government investment, certain projects. And in this cycle, because the industry is shrinking for the country and the government income is decreasing, and now what happens in this situation? It's an economy needs the government to invest more, but the government has less income, right? So that means fiscal deficits increase. And when in this situation, what they can do? They can only borrow more. They would need more sovereign debt, right? They have to borrow more. But because the economy in recession and they need to borrow more, what happens? High cost, high debt. People are unwilling to lend to them, right? Asking high interest rate. And this is exactly the sovereign debt crisis. Now, I'm using Spain German, but in reality, when the initial crisis happens, it was first started with Greek, right? And basically, the key problem, as I have illustrated, it's very simple, right? It's because of the unification of domestic currency and the international currency. Right. Now, this is one point. Of course, I'm using this and using Spain, but the initial starting was Greek, right? Now, what I'm showing is just the economic mechanism. I'm not justifying saying those governments are not spending too much or anything, right? The other criticism could be true. Maybe their social welfare is too good. Maybe the government is spending too much. Maybe they are corruption. These might all be there. But even if these are not there, by the design of the system, you're going to have this problem, right? So it's clear on this one? Okay. Now, are we going to, let's see how we're going to do this thing. let's continue actually instead because of the. Now, the second thing I want to show is, so we see in this situation, they seems to have to borrow more, right? Another problem is they have incentive to borrow more, right? The example of U.S. we have talked 2 weeks ago. When you have your domestic currency are the same as international currency, you have incentive to borrow more. We show the U.S. example because they have the privilege. All the other countries need U.S. dollars as a reserve, and they need to investment, so they invest in U.S. treasury bills. Now, in the euro currency, the same thing is going to happen. This incentive to borrow. Now, how it works? Think about it. Now, the domestic currency is the same as the trading currency, right? Thinking of saying just in the situation of Spain, we just said. Now, the interest rate, before the crisis happens, the interest rate of the Spain is the same of the interest rate as in Germany, right? Even though the Spain has a much higher credit risk. But before the crisis is triggered, people don't see that, and the treasury bill of the Spain is probably at the same interest rate as treasury bill of Germany, right? This will create an incentive to borrow cheaper funds relative to them. And would the government or politician has incentive to stop it, to say we are already in the, in the tricky, we already have over debt. If we keep doing, we might bring a sovereign crisis, right? It might. But would an individual politician has incentive to stop it? They don't. They face a dilemma of, for all the politicians, they want their performance of the economy, right? And as we analyze, because they are in recession, they tend to go into recession. And for those, they have their political performance, they need to bring the economy, even in short term, looks good. And the only way for them to do is spending more. Invest more for the government, right? That will push them into more deep in the debt. And so as long as they can borrow, they will borrow more because they have, even the policymaker has the incentive to, in short term, makes their performance looks good. Right? So this incentive to increase their borrowing, the public debt increase. Right? So this is pretty much. Now you understand, right? See, so this euro has been traveling for so long now. After this, you see this is by design. It will happen in this way. Now, then you're wondering why don't other people, economists, see this? I'm not the smartest person in this world. Many people see this, right? Many economists, they're much more sophisticated, smarter than me. They see it as well. Why it is happening anyway? So then this is a background of why euro is introduced and why it cannot be terminated, and also related to this, why US dollar don't fail, right? This is on the US dollar fail we introduced before, and now here we talk a bit on the euro. Go ahead. We're going to talk about solving problem a little bit. There was always short term. They never really gets exactly solved. They just delayed it. Okay. Now, the establishing European Union is to promote a free movement of people, goods, service, and capital, in economy. There's another typo. What's going on with me? Okay. Okay. So this free movement is good, right? Because when it's free movement, reduce the tax or tariff on those, you increase the resource allocation efficiency, right? And the Europeans also always has this idealism of creating a big Euro bonds, a big country together, and this is sort of related historically, politically, of they have small state countries. They're always thinking, for example, China to them. They always don't have such image of China being too big, threatening to them. This is politics, okay? We don't talk about history and politics, so we don't. So the politician also tends to use this term to attract votes, right? They achieve a unification, they achieve certain, big bonding within the European countries. So they also have the incentive to create this unification, right? So then that's what happens. Now back to what you're talking about, how do we solve the problem? We can skip the slides showing the Greek and the Greek's debt and then the US debt. And basically by earlier introduced, right? So what other countries are going to run into sovereign debt crisis in the Euro countries? Those with lower productivity, right? Those with less competitive. And Greek is probably the weakest one among all of them. And that's why Greek is the first one run into the sovereign debt crisis. And then even if Greek takes us out, there will be the next one. As long as there are economic strength difference among the countries, the weak one will keep running in this problem. Now, what you want to talk about is the solution, right? Now, if you read this media or politics talks, they said, oh, they should ask the government to cut in cost. And we should, the economic and economic mechanism early. Cutting costs is not going to help anything, right? It's not going to help their shrinking industry. And it's going to make the economic situation even worse because now you basically took away the last tool that could intervene the economy, right? And another one is bailouts, right? So bailouts will involve, other stronger countries sort of pay off some of this debt. And basically, that was the solution or temporary solution they used when they solved the Greek sovereign debt crisis, and also the more recent, before the crisis happened, they started using the bailouts, right? But the bailouts doesn't solve the underlying problem either, because the economic imbalance is still there, right? The new debt will be created. And then very soon they will have to run into another bailouts. And so eventually there will be something else has to be done. And of course, either you can see they're talking about exit, right? They talk about breaking this European Union. That's one possible, and it was a very big worry after the British exited the EU, but even the British don't use euro, but they exited the European Economic Union, right? And then during this crisis, and every time one country runs into sovereign debt crisis, the talk of let that country exit EU or exit euro was always on the table being discussed. But as we have understand, if they let one country, say Greek, exit, the same problem is going to happen to the next one in line, the weakest economy, or Spain, or Italy, or some of the country, or Irish, right? And the same problem is going to run. And it's going to be eventually all the country going to be, as long as down to two countries, the same problem is going to be there, right? So this all, so far, it's a delay. And another alternative that has been discussed, but it's very hard to reach is because of political issue, is then the political unification, right? So then all the countries have to put their fiscal policy together, right? Then there would not be the imbalance of trades between Germany or Spain, between Italy and Greek, right? Because now all the government have the same fiscal policy. Basically, that becomes one country, right? So this is sort of this idea. Of course, many people like that idea of the idealism in the past. There's big analogy. People compare China and Europe is China had almost 2,000 years ago, the war solved the unification problem, become one united country, right? Many 2,000 years ago, probably. While Europe, over these 1,000 years, a bit less than China, was always those small states fighting each other. The war never united them together. And some people like the idealism of this monetary policy eventually bring this country together, unification. But again, these are politics. We can't talk about it. We just talk about the economics here. Okay, so this is this is for Euro crisis. Any questions? Any questions? Okay. So if not, so supposedly this will be the next half class will be the midterm review, and you guys can ask some questions because the midterm, very unfortunately, they arrange you guys to have the midterm in week 7, which is after the break. I will always say I prefer to let you guys have it before break, then you can relax, right? But it's a central arrangement I can't control. So this is, I'll be staying here. I posted the midterm review guidelines? If not, I will do it right after the class. I have a midterm review, the key points that you need to know, okay, for the midterm. And then we can, if you want to have questions, you can ask now or have a break or whatever. So this is, or if you want, today we could finish early because it's just the other half of the class time I dedicated for you guys to ask me questions. Okay, so those you have questions, you want to stay to ask, it's fine. If you're not, we are finishing early today because the rest is for the review and the QA. I can give you a little bit of review of the key points, right? So basically, for the first week, let me looking at this icon. I will post the guidelines of the key points. But for the first week, right, basically you need to know the basic definition of the financial assets, the classification, and why we classify them in this way, right? And the purpose to have the financial assets, why it is so important to have a market to trade them. And then the institution, all different institutions, their role, what kind of service they provide, the key business. That's the first week. Or maybe let's do this. How about we do this? Let's take a break. You guys have too much in mind already. Let's take a break. And if you want to stay, you stay. I will run through all the 6 weeks key points. Okay, I think that's better. Okay, so we take 20 minutes break, and then we come back. I will run through all the key points of the 6 weeks. Okay. Alex, right?
Yeah.
You just have to ask them to respond to it.
Okay. Because I asked everyone. Everyone says they're full.
No, you are in the group 7, right?
Yeah.
You are in the group 7.
Yeah. But they weren't responding to me at all. So.
Well, unfortunately, you are with not responsive team.
Yeah.
You just have to work with
Could I
them.
change teams or something? Because I see there's a couple other teams that are 4 out of 5. And I can't access I can't change teams on my waddle.
I can't guarantee they are responsive either. It's a norm.
I've got a couple of responses from some people, but they were said that they were postgraduates and I'm an undergraduate, and they wanted me to double check with you if that's okay.
It is okay for me to, you can join them, but yeah, as long as they let you, I have no problem.
Okay. If it doesn't work out in the end, I don't know, like, what should I do? Because I don't even have a case study yet because they have the case study and everything, so.
I don't know why they don't respond to you. I
Yeah.
can't force them.
Yeah.
But
that's
you are
true.
in the team. You should try to find them.
Okay. That's cool.
Or if you want to change a group, you just email me what new group you want to join.
Okay.
If you saw. Okay.
Thanks.
Hi, Professor. I have a question about the recent events.
Okay.
The Argentina just
Mhm.
raised its interest rate to 60%, and besides the
Interest to 60%.
Yes.
What do you mean?
60% interest rate.
Who?
Argentina. Argentina.
Argentina.
Yeah,
Okay.
Argentina. Yes.
Uh-huh.
You raised its interest rate to 60% from 45%, and the president says he wants to deal with the inflation.
This is a crisis time. Okay, so what is your question?
So why he want to raise the interest rate to deal with the inflation problem? Because the article said the president says what that's the solution, and I don't see.
This is money banking. So first of all, these are very weird. But if you simply want to deal with inflation, have you taken money in a banking course? Do you know what is M1?
Yes, a little bit.
Okay. So if you have a high inflation, it's because you have too much money supply, right? And M1 says is M0 divided by a reserve rate, which, okay, let's not using R, let's using delta, whatever, alpha, okay? Right. So this money being printed by central bank is fixed. And this is a reserve rate, which is also fixed, right? Now, this reserve rate is fixed, but how much this can be coming to M1 depends on circulation. The circulation will come in if you have cheap interest rate, right? Investment increase, the circulation increase.
Yes.
If you increase the interest rate, the circulation can decrease because it's more expensive to borrow, more expensive to invest, right? So it will decrease, basically decrease M1. Decrease M1 is the total circulation of the money, so you decrease inflation.
So want to decrease the money supply.
Yes. Economically, it's this. This is in the money banking, like central bank. It's not in our course, but this is how you're thinking of it. Whether this is going to work, we don't know, because this is in a crisis time.
It's a
They're
crisis,
just
so-
trying to.
So it's very special. It's not a routine method.
It's never routine. The intervention was never routine. The only routine thing the government does is called an open market operation.
Open market.
Yeah, purchase, they call it. Open market. These are the only routine they do. And this routine does is sort of just a small adjustment of interest rate or just to provide a daily interest rate indicator. That's the only routine they do. Yeah.
Yes, because I have this confusion because I saw the official effect.
Yeah, this is right now the world is in crisis. So, but they are those policies. This number are very strange. These policies are very random, but they are. These are the economic reason behind it.
Yes, because I saw that Argentina they have kept the high exchange, high interest rate for a long time. So. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. No.
Greece, for example, they are experiencing sort of a debt crisis, right? So who's within the Eurozone framework, who's actually responsible in sort of helping them?
Nobody is responsible, but they will be incentivized to help, for example, Germany.
Right, but what would Germany gain by helping? Because, I mean, because they have the same monetary.
If the German let it fail, because German are the one, the competitive one, are gain from this process.
Exactly.
So if German don't help, then the only way they have to let Greek, keep the Greek out of the system, right? Then the other weak country will exit as well. Then the whole system will break down.
I would assume that if Germany, for example, helps them, if I were a citizen of Germany, for example, I wouldn't agree so much because
The citizen is of course not happy.
Exactly,
Yes.
so it leads to a political problem
Yes.
at the end, right?
Yes. So this is a political problem. Yes.
So it's not so much of economic only.
It's a problem created by economy arrangement.
Right.
But the solution would have to be political.
Because, for example, like Turkey was thinking of joining, right? And still debating whether
They
should
never join now. It's completely not be able to join because of the crisis.
Because of the crisis, but I mean, before 2016, they were still thinking about wanting to join.
They want to join, but it was, see, this Euro thing, this European Union Euro thing has a lot of political idealism in it. They have been rejecting Turkey for many years because for many European countries they don't want to admit Turkey as Are you from Turkey?
No.
Yeah,
I'm
they
from
don't.
Indonesia.
Yes, they don't want to admit Turkey as European. So
Right, so it's more into political.
it's a lot of political things. I think it's purely because of political things they set up this economic mechanism that doomed to fail. So if they want to fix it, they would have to continue on their political line.
So they have to integrate as one political party,
they
like the whole
they
EU.
either have to integrate or they have to abandon it.
And the whole, right. But in terms of like membership requirements, right? Because in order to join the EU, you would need to have, for example, I think a maximum 3% public deficit, blah blah.
Yes,
in terms
that's
of
to
GDP.
ensure the economic condition, the
all
discrepancy
equal.
is not too
Exactly.
big, right? But so that's why Greek is present because Greek is very weak economy.
Yeah, since the beginning, right? Because
Yes,
there was a case saying that they sort of played smart accounting, so they sort of hide.
Yes, to hide the debt.
Yeah.
And they did a swap contract for 10 years. So when the swap contract expires, the debt exploded.
Exactly. So why did they still accept them? Because it's something that is transparent and everyone knows about it.
It's political issues.
So it's more political.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Okay, and let's do the review then. I was thinking. Now, for the first week, okay, the key points, right? So the category type definition of the assets, markets, and institution, right? And particularly, very key thing is the assets is a contract, a legal contract with monetary value. Markets is a structure. These are the key points. Now then in the assets, thinking about the different category, which is simple, right? Fixed versus variable. And why we need assets, what it could achieving, and the type of markets and what markets can do. Then the institution, each institution, what's their function. And from their function, you can see the risk of them, right? So that's probably the very basic of the first class. Right? So I think not much to go detail. And then the second week, I'm just going to give you the very key points. For the second week, right, so this investment opportunity you probably don't, it's for your understanding, right? Now you don't have to really too much to looking at that, but the key, as long as you understand key message of them, that's fine. Now the economic growth, where it come from, you need to understand. You don't have to understand, remember this graph, but you basically need to know it's the labor, the capital, the productivity matters, right? And the productivity, this is, again, for your understanding of how the economy's product between countries, how it can changes, right? And then these key things you understand of, this is breakdown. You don't need to remember the number of breakdown, but again, same. Where does the growth come from, right? The labor, technology, productivity, and the capital efficiency of the capital. Now, so this is, again, what determines the productivity, the macro conditions. So conceptually, you need to understand them, right? Once you understand it, it's pretty much for you to, you want to memorize them, it's your choice, but understand them will probably be better. Once you understand, you always memorize, because I'm not going to ask you to write an essay. I'm only asking you to do multiple choice, remember, right? So understand it is better. Okay, and then now this one, if you haven't do it right on the quiz, review it, okay? And the simplest one is this, to draw a line of 0, 1, 2, 3 points, right? And coming out, sort of reproduce this table. This is the way you can do it. So to working through I have hit it on the slides, but you working through of how the slides was coming to be. Then you will be clear, right? It's all here, step by step. Okay, so this one you need to make sure you got it, okay. So basically to here, the two key points, right? So what influences the productivity, hence the growth, and how the market reflects this growth, right? And remember, this growth is expectation of the future growth, not the past. Right, so that is the key points. Divergence, this is again, so it's this on the points is the labor influence, right? For the growth, that per capita is not going to be so much related to the past growth with market itself, but the population is a key driving portion as well. So that's the key message here. I think these are probably not too much. This you read is pretty much you understand already, right? The market does not necessarily reflect the past growth, but the market will reflect the future growth, as a mathematical example. Now, this again factor to consider international investment. If you look at it, it's back to the productivity, right? It's the same. If you're reading them so clearly, it's feedback to the productivity, efficiency of the capital, etc. Right? It's the same. I just have this is like repeating same thing that from different angles. Right? Now so these we probably don't need to look at very much, right? Okay. So then then you're adding one of the foreign investor that are adding the actual risk of foreign exchange, right? Foreign exchange country risk. This is part. Okay. Now this foreign exchange regime, we have it here, but later when we're talking about currency, we talk about it again, right? The free floating, stabilized or pegged or managed floating, etc. And these are all, I think, could be not that important. Okay, so these are the part of the productivity is the key points is remember the factors determine the productivity, which is later also when you consider investing, they're pretty much the same factor to consider, plus some short-term political foreign exchange risk, etc., and how the market reflects the growth. These are the two key points on that account. So the next one is on the law of finance and economic growth, right? And here what we emphasize is first, what are the institutions that important to be in place to support the economic growth, right? So we talk about legal system, enforcement, government system, informal arrangement like family value trust, etc. Right? These are so these are the possible institutional arrangement. Then we're talking about conventionally, people thinking you have to, or Western thinking you have to legal system, legal enforcement to develop the market, then it brings the growth, right? So what is the conventional thoughts? And then we talk about China as a counter example, which illustrates you the example. The detailed evidence, you don't have to remember detail, but you need to remember why China is a counter example, right? And then what is the explanation for China's growth, or the possible explanations, right? Which comes back to the government efforts and the familism informal arrangement. Okay. So now in this, so that's the key concepts, right? In the process of it, the details what you need to understand is, in the legal system, what are those investor protection to be considered to be good? You know, what are bad, right? What has good investor protection, what has bad investor protection, and what could be the measurement of the good enforcement or not good enforcement, right? That's on the legal side. When they're coming to developing markets, you need to know those measurements of the markets, which will be already going to the next class, sorry. Right. So the second class is what is the institution, right? The legal system, enforcement, what are considered good investor protection, what are the bad investor protection. That's the second part of this week 2. Now in the week 3, the first part is, again, we're back on the conventional finance growth model, but we focus on these, right? Actually, I had this one repeating at the beginning. And now we're looking at China as a puzzle, right? And its possible growth. And in this, a key thing is the measurement of the financial market development, right? The legal system, investor protection, encouraging the financial market. What are the measures of the financial market or the banking development? So this one you need to surely know. And then you probably don't need to really remember the detailed number at all, but you need to know with those measures where China cuts down for, right? Because that's a part you understand why China is a puzzle. Right? And where is China's financial market banking system situation looking like under these measures? And then so these are basically the description here, concurrent China, what it stands for, right? And then we sort of looking into what could explain China's growth puzzle, right? Because now we're looking at investor protection and the market, and China doesn't seem to fit into the conventional. Then what is China? So we're talking about government, which is state capitalism, and the familism, right? So the two. In these ones, right? You want to understand. So these descriptions, you just need to understand concepts. China has a lot of state ownership. That's basic idea. I would never ask you to give me the detailed number. Okay. So then basically not the concepts, the main key arguments along the state capitalism. What could be the arguments or the things that could be bad in the state-controlled economy? What could be the good coming out of it? Right? So looking at things with both perspectives, and you probably wanted to know that's what are the key reasons, right? The state, some of the descriptions of the allocation of resources, etc. Or could be. Now, then the next one is on the familism, right? So the familism is we want to understand what could be good coming out of family ownership. For example, now the agency problem between the manager and the shareholder is probably getting reduced, right? But the major conflict now comes between the controlling shareholders, the family, versus the minority shareholders, right? That's the key things you want to understand. And how could it be, what could be the way for them to steal? But then why even you suspect they can steal, why the family ownership can be popular, right? There's ways to address it. Certain, for example, whether they can, the legal would matter, but also when the firms commit to dividend payment as expropriation, etc., to limit their expropriation, etc. Right? So basically, all the conflicts in the family ownership, or the resolving of those conflicts, but to understand why this could work. Okay, and then the informal sector also including those. Because we talk about China's financial market and banking inefficiency, right? Then we have to talk about financing. Because even you have family ownership, it doesn't address financing issues. So on the financing issues, you sort of understand of the private sectors that can have the, why they could, especially here. So the alternative arrangement through the small investor outside is playing a role for the financing. Later on, we will come back to this again because we're going to focus on those financing things. Here, we just say the financing part, you need the financing part comes in as well. And so those are just description of the banking situation in China. Again, just reading them through is enough. I would never ask you when they entered or the number. I don't examine too much on the factual thing, but more on your understanding and then you know how to work out the problem. That's the focus. Okay, so informal financing with the shadow, right? Projects, we can skip those. Okay, so that's week 2, mainly on China, right? Basics on China. Why it's a puzzle and what could be the explanation. Now on week 4, right? This is go to week 4. We talk about the China's RMB thing, right? So on the RMB thing, the focus is for you to understand what are the key features that for a currency to be internationally accepted, which will be including the nature of the currency and also what is the strength of the economy behind that currency need to be there, or the stability need to be there for the currency to be able to be accepted. That's the key, right? That's the first key. The strengths of the economy. The second one is actually, let me do this a little bit. Let me skip this part. So the second one for China is the arrangement, which is the key part is here. This could be the statement, the 3 gifts. Basically to understand how you let your currency goes out and encourage offshore trading and how you also coming up with the arrangement for the RMB to come back to, right? The circulation, the three gifts. Understand this one. So these are basic on the RMB convertibility. That's the key. The economic strength needed behind it, and how the mechanism to be set up for China to, it's an early stage, to trying to go on that road. Okay. That's the key point. Now, on the U.S., so we talk about on the U.S. currency thing, right? Now, the key points on this one is to understand the incentive of borrowing. Okay. Why a dominant global currency as domestic currency can encourage the borrowing, and why this is sort of a trap, that a problem that the whole economy, whole global economy knows U.S. is way too over in debt, but they couldn't solve the issue. Okay. So that's basically the key here. I think that's about it. Oh, this one, sorry, I forgot this one. On this one, a common international currency, how a common international currency could dissolve the problem. Well, this is a hypothetical case, so you just need to understand the mechanism of why having a common international currency would be working, will be self-regulating, rather than let a country go deep into debt. Okay, clear the key points? Okay, then in week 4. Right, so there is a little bit of the detail in terms of what is current account means, and the capital account balance, current account balance, capital account. This you probably need to read a bit. The reason is I know because most of you probably don't have that background to come from, right? So this is in these 2 slides, but it's very basic, right, to understand. And then you want to understand the arrangement of the Bretton Woods system, right? How the U.S. dollar pegged to the gold and the other currency pegged to U.S. And then because of the U.S.'s trading deficits, the other currency lost the trust in dollar, and they all want to convert to gold, and then the system breaks down, right? This is a little history, but this is just 2 points I just told you, right? The arrangement and how it breaks down. And this is a very important part of the history of the foreign exchange. It's really basic, you should know this, okay, the breakdown. And the foreign exchange regime, right, the arrangement, that's just understanding how it was arranged. Basically, you either have fixed or you have few floating on 2 ends. Then in the middle, you have some kind of stable mechanism or pegged arrangement, or some kind of managed floating arrangement. Okay. And on this one, when you understand this arrangement, you probably want to, related to the aging financial crisis, you want to understand why those pegged arrangement, and when are deviate too much from the economic condition, it can cause currency crisis. Right? So if the economic condition is suggesting people are not trusting this currency anymore, but the peg is fixed at a high currency value, right? So then basically the market force and a fixed arrangement is at deep crash, right? And then initially, because this fixed arrangement not allowing the market to reflect this force until it can no longer hold it, the crash happens, then you have a sudden drop, right? And this sudden drop will cause the currency crisis and also the economic crisis. Okay, this is this part on the regime, currency regime. Okay, so on this part, this slide, that's what you need to understand. Now, particularly on the understanding of the market force of the foreign exchange, then it's those those parity conditions. Okay, so that what is purchasing power parity, right? But basically, if you use same goods, you should have the same value, and because they have different currency, right? Then from that you getting the currency value. And the interest rate parity. So you need to know each of the parity conditions, and particularly if this is if all the parity condition has to in the end codes, right? And if the parity condition deviates, particularly we show an example of the interest rate parity condition deviates, then you can do covered interest rate arbitrage to bring it back. Okay, this actually still exists in the economy. The last week is Professor Yamada is Japanese. Even Japan housewife can do this. It still exists. The reason is they just have because the market, once you have interest parity condition and a purchase parity condition and forward market, current market, but often you might have a deviation. But of course, those deviation will disappear very quickly. It's those arbitrage bring back the equilibrium. Okay, so this example of if there exists a deviation, how is arbitrage bring it back? Right. So in this, for example, the one being too cheap, people keep buying until the price goes up, right? They reach equilibrium again. So this one, it's pretty simple, right? So if you want to make sure you're getting it, just run through it step by step of everything on these slides. Okay, so this is again important. You want to make sure you're getting them. Just run through step by step how you did it. Because I didn't teach it, so he might not teach you guys, but okay. There is, if I taught it, I would also practically how you can do the borrowing stuff, but if he hasn't, I might not put in the exam, or if I put it, will become bonus points. I would think about it later. But for you guys, as long as you run through step by step, it's good. Then this is determinants of foreign exchange rate, right? If you're looking at the determinants of foreign exchange rate, it's back to those parity conditions, purchasing powers, right? The current account, capital account again. So this is almost a summary slides of everything on the foreign exchange rate. Okay. So these are then the aging financial crisis. So from the foreign exchange arrangement, you probably start to understand how the aging financial crisis happens with the arrangement and the economic important fact. You probably understand it already, right? So on this part, the second part of this week 5, the key things is pretty much just to understand what is currency crisis, right? The sudden drop of the currency value. And some of those things, if you know them, I'm never testing when it happened, whatever, but you need to know what that has happened. And then the generation model in terms of it could be caused by the adverse macroeconomic conditions, right? It's driven by the market force, or it could be driven by self-fulfilling. Right? When the people lost the confidence, they just start free. Even the economy is healthy, you can bring down the currency. Right? So these are first generation model and the second generation model of this self-fulfilling thing. Now the third generation model is just pretty much designed to aging crisis. I think it's pretty much the combination of first and the second one, but talking about what was the background, the banking unhealthy banking system. That's all. Okay. That's pretty much it. And the other ones, it's just some process for you to understand what happened on the history, etc. Okay. So that's the week 5. Any questions? Or am I going too fast? Is that okay or too fast? Going fine? Fine, okay. Now, week 6 still fresh, right, today for Euro crisis. And the key part, it's pretty simple, right? So you just need to know some of the key facts of Euro arrangement. Oh, first, what is sovereign debt crisis? What does it mean? This is a basic concept, right? And then the Euro arrangement, right? Remember, not all European countries are in EU. Some European countries are not in EU. And not all European Union member states using Euro. Only 17 out of 27 European countries using the Euro. Okay. And the EU, the basic concept, okay, so that's, and now this comes the key of, this is the whole key, right? When you have those arrangements in place, it's going to doom to fail, and the mechanism I'm showing you, right? Which you need to understand. If you haven't learned it before, here I would like you to understand these 3 tools and how this tool could be used, right? In recession, how you use each of those tools. In a bubble, how you use any of these tools, right? And particularly, then apply this to the example of, say, hypothetically, just the competition between Germany and Spain, or any two, one strong country, one weak country, right? How those tools can come in to break the bad cycle, right? So you don't, not only knowing lower interest rate will help, I want you to understand that lower interest rate will improve the investment, right? So that will break down the industry shrinking links. Okay, so that's basically the 3 things. And then this is back into the incentive borrowing, that's okay. Now, a bit on this, not too much because that's too much politics, but I want you to remember the concept of this EU arrangement, have this country together, is have the free movement of people, goods, service, and the capital. And this is in, sorry, this is a word long, it's a typo again. And this is important because especially coming to the allocation of resources more effectively. Now, then on the solution, again, I just need you to understand what is the surface problem that the solution was fixing the surface, what is the key problem that previously we talked about, the arrangement. Right? And I think that's about it. Right? So if you list the key points down, that's not that many. So each class probably will have like 2, mostly 2 key points. Understanding, it will be very important because it's multiple choice, right? And also understanding, you getting more out of you understanding the concept rather than memorize. Something you understand, you will never forget. Something you memorize, you may forget. Okay, go ahead.
So there's only choice question.
Also the calculation. And you probably already know where the calculation could be, right?
So the structure just like the quiz.
Exactly like the quiz. So there'll be multiple choice, and then there are calculation questions. So there's no short essay. I don't need you to write long essays.
How many multiple choice
I'm thinking it was 20. I think it was 20. I will post it online, the review key points, also the how many questions in the, I will post it probably this afternoon. Any other questions? Okay. And if you have questions, I'll stay here a bit. You can ask the questions. Go ahead. What? When you want to know the marks of the quiz, right? I hope the system can finish in a week. It's just a lot of people. She's busy, and it should be coming out, I think, in a week. And I will post on the Vato. Okay, and after you see on the Vato your marks, if you want to see the sheets, you come to my office, preferably in the office hour. Okay. No.
I was ready for the lecture, and can I see the first two questions?
Oh. Here's the seed answers.
So our question is about related to the classics. So I'm wondering if there is possible that you can be a master's thesis supervisor.
I'm probably too busy. Yes,
So,
I'm too busy to do
so you have so many programs.
I have PhD student and I have a lot of university service stuff. Yeah.
So that is really possible for you to.
I prefer not here because I don't have time. And it will not be good for you. Actually, which question is it? I continue until. I'm tired, sorry.
You mean that when I calculate sick return in year 2, I must calculate P3 in
Not in S3. See P2, let's say if you apply the P2, you expect the cash flow at 3, right? Now, what is expect cash flow? What is cash flow? You have to do this one. So instead of do directly, so you first do cash flow or expect cash flow, then the price. Expansion here is 96, right? And here will be 96 multiple 1.04, which is 100, simple 100 or some other number, right? That's the make it simple. And here will be, let's instead P2, so here will be 104 cash flow. This is, see, this is cash flow. Now when you calculate price, you have P0, which equals 96 multiple 1.4%, because your expected is 4%, right? But here is 10% minus 4%. Right? Now P1 will be your cash flow at expect. This is at P2, 1 year ahead, right? PR minus EG. And the P2 will be the expect cash flow of C3. 3 will be here, will be 104, which is count cash flow 2, multiple on expectation, right, which is 6% now, which is EG. Right, so then this is going to be the 10% minus now 6%. Right, so I know a lot of people, so this would be basically coming from 96. This one is already 96, man plus 4%, another 4%, which comes to this point, right? And then you have another expectation a year ahead. I know many people just have wrong with that. And then you also want to do the P1 because you want to return. P1 will be basically it's this point, right? So it's 100 multiple, but at that time, your expectation is still just 4%, right? And your 10%, your gross is 4%. Then you have another price. And then this is not P3, this will be P2 minus P1 plus cash flow of 2, right? Divided by P1. Just
next time whenever we do, we have to draw the line, do it step by step. Don't try to skip steps. Then it's all clear, right? If you do it step by step, it's all clear.
And with exchange return, I just minus 10%.
Yes, this is the total return. Then to get the excess return, you minus the expected return.
Thank you.